bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, welcome, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Today is Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. And tonight on Fade to Black, ex-Navy pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves is with us. And he is a former lieutenant in the United States Navy, FA-18F pilot. He served for a decade, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. He was one of the first active duty pilots to come forward publicly about regular sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena, today UFOs, known today as UAPs, and has been featured in 60 Minutes, the History Channel, the New York Times, and now Fade to Black. And I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Lieutenant Ryan Graves. Ryan, good evening, young man. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Jimmy. Thanks for having me here.
It was a long road, but we got it. We made it happen, and welcome to the show. And here's the deal: you get the first time guest disclaimer, a tradition that's been going on around here for 10 years. So let's get that out of the way. Which is, Ryan, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, it ends. But we're going to end as friends. There you go.
All right.
Painless, right?
Very good.
Yeah. The next time.
Agree to that.
Yeah. The next time you're on, you won't get it, and so that's out of the way. I have forgotten that a couple of times over the years, and I watch, the chat room and the email light up, dude, and so I've had to go back after the break and get that in. But welcome to the show, and we've got a lot to discuss tonight, and I kind of want to revisit the past a little bit for those that have not heard from you directly. And of course, this is the first time that you've been on the show. It's the first time that you and I have had the opportunity to talk. So I want to revisit 2014 if we can.
Sure.
And we'll do that because that's going to be the foundation for the conversation tonight. But I actually want to move before that, if we can. You've got an engineering degree, right? You've got an engineering background. Oh, I wanted to. Do you still fly?
No, not really right at the moment. I just don't really live in a place where there's anything that fun to rent, frankly.
Right. Fair enough. So you've got an engineering degree, engineering background. That's where your mind was. Eventually, you went in to the Navy and became a pilot. But before that, let's talk about when you were a kid. Did you know what a UFO was? Did you have any interest in aliens or life in the universe or anything like that?
Well, I think I would split those out a little bit. I don't think I had, as a child, really like a interest or education in what I would call like UFO culture, maybe.
Right.
So that was not something I was overly familiar with, but I was generally a very curious child about the universe, in general, to include whether there was life kind of out there, aliens and, just generally science fiction as well as I started to grow up more and more. But so I was generally very curious.
The transition of an engineering degree may seem a little awkward to some, to go from that to a pilot. So that's another question. Did you always, all young men want to grow up to be a Navy pilot? Let's be very clear, right? But did you see that coming, and why that decision?
Yeah, I served with a lot of men and women that did grow up wanting to have a career as a fighter pilot or any type of aviator. I frankly just wasn't one of those people. I didn't have exposure to aviation as a child. I didn't even really live near an airport. No one in my family flew. No one in my family, other than my father, for a very brief period of time, way back when, who was in the National Guard, in my immediate vicinity, really served in any of the recent conflicts. So, for me, it was kind of outside the scope. But what kind of transitioned me into it was my first internship, where I did an engineering internship, and I realized just how dull the specific field I was going in was going to be, and I didn't think that was really where I wanted to go, because I knew, like I said, I was very curious and passionate about technology and just science in general. But I didn't necessarily know how I wanted to apply that. I didn't know if that was doing research somewhere, or perhaps using advanced tools in some fashion, or perhaps exploring in some way. But the challenge I chose, after I was exposed to what that dull life perhaps would have been, was to do the opposite, which what I selected was to fly fighter aircraft, and at least challenge myself in that way. And there are all types. You have perhaps history majors and engineers that go into flying. Some folks, going with masters. What you see a lot of times are pilots with engineering degrees. A lot of times like to target test pilot school and eventually NASA as well.
Yeah, my best friend, Steve Murillo. I don't know if you know Steve, but great guy. And same thing. He went to the Naval Academy. Didn't see that as his future. Graduated from the Naval Academy, Marine Corps fighter pilot. Just like that. And one of the most grounded, cool people that I've ever met. And now he's a real estate guy, right? But this small period in his life, and the one question that I have to ask, this is guy to guy, flying an F-18, coolest gig in the world, coolest rush, pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, any fighter jet like that. I mean, that is really why not necessarily the cool, but just let me describe it this way. There's really two aspects to it. There's the flying part of it, which is what 99.9% of people think it is. It's sitting around and making the jet go where you want, and it's quite the dance, and it's fun. And then there's the other side of it, which is this massive weapon system that you're operating, and the tactics and the skill set and the knowledge and the training that requires to do that is another whole battle that really is something that I didn't appreciate, before, because it was impossible to do so. No one really can. And that's an entirely different type of a dance. And people always like to ask me if I miss it, right? And I do miss the flying part. I don't necessarily miss that latter part.
Yeah,
whatnot, because it's quite the challenge. You can't play chess continuously.
No, you can't. You can't. And psychologically, that's just got to eventually take its toll for sure. Now, the other part to this, though, when you have that kind of skill set, you are rational. Right, you have to think rationally all the time, and with clear head, and everything hopefully makes sense to you. You have to fly the plane. You can't make any errors. An error could be a really bad thing. So if any distraction is there, there's consequences, and so you mentally are so focused, and you have to be so rational all the time. When you get pulled out of that box, like what happened in 2014, does that throw off your sense of reality when you think that you've got it together and you're grounded?
Not necessarily, because the way that we kind of came to terms with what was happening, at least I did, was that it wasn't an instantaneous change in our perspective. We just were seeing things we couldn't necessarily explain, but we had rationales for it, that over time, many of them went away. And, we were left still asking questions. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. It does. So it didn't throw you out of focus.
No. And, the way I would describe it is, we have to, it's all about priorities, right? Once we're in there, our priorities are our priorities, and they do not change, right? Like our fuel is always going to be our priority until we land. and things of that nature. And so, and our training as well. So when we see objects out there, we occasionally might have the opportunity to investigate in some manner, but much of the time we're seeing these things over such a massive area that, it's not practical to be going and necessarily investigating any one at any given time. And so you just put it into the safety bucket. You might see it in that working area you're going to go into, and you just say, I'll use the other working area, right? And so now you're 50 miles away, and it's not necessarily that it's an immediate safety threat that we have to go investigate and then rationalize with ourselves when we land. It's just, an annoyance that builds up over time. And of course, as it became, over time, over the period of time while this was happening, it became, the data started coming in, right? All right, we flew by it and it, we couldn't see it, or we could see it and it looked like this, and that's very strange. Or now they're over here. And so there really wasn't that come to Jesus moment where we had to rethink ourselves there. It wasn't quite that sudden.
And let's get to that. Let's get to that first day. Well, actually, before we get to the first day, right, you have gotten used to and acclimated, to flying this aircraft and the procedures going through that. It's the military operation. Everything is so mechanized and well oiled. You've got your team around you and the ground crew and mechanics, and right. Everything is routine, and hopefully everything is always running smoothly.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. And then one day something is different, right? And when you first had your first sensor, go off, what went through your mind?
So at first, when we first had these on our radar, it was there was some expectation that perhaps we would see more because our radar is better. So we had a APG-73 radar that we were not seeing these objects with, and we did eventually upgrade our radar, and we were able to see the objects out there. We went into it with the expectation that perhaps we could see more stuff, but that's kind of at range and way off. But to now suddenly see things that were in the area, almost as if the fidelity of the sensor was better, and now we're picking things up. It was disconcerting because we didn't even know if they were necessarily even real objects or if they were physical objects. We had to, at the time we were considering that perhaps they were false tracks.
Because the radar is now upgraded and it's just good, right? It's much better. And that could be just the case that this was there all the time with the old radar. Now you've got the new stuff and it's picking it up.
That's one potential option. Yep.
And
I mean, that's not the conclusion we necessarily had at the moment, but that's where obviously we've got to today.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so to that moment, what happened? And again, in this area, we have okay. Let me reframe this a little bit because I think there's some confusion over the years since you have come forward, where you guys are training out on the East Coast. How far off of the coast? Number one, and number two, how much of this is restricted airspace, or can, just like any private pilot, wing it through on an ultralight, right? Is this an area that is only set for military exercises?
So the answer to your first question is they start 10 miles off the coast roughly, and they go off to about probably 250 miles, but they're broken up into maybe 50 by 50 blocks, something like that in nature.
Okay.
50 miles by 50 miles or 80 miles by 80 miles. And we could claim multiple of those blocks or a single one of them. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
How much of this is restricted airspace?
Oh yeah, restricted. So yeah, so the unfortunately the answer is that there are two answers to that, and they're diametrically opposed. One of them is that if you're just normal traffic that takes off within the United States and you're U.S. traffic, technically the areas are warning areas. They're not restricted areas. And that means that, yes, a Cessna or something else can technically fly into that area. However, it will immediately get called out if there's traffic in there. The controllers will alert the F-18s, and they'll call the traffic out to let them know there's active traffic working in there, and then we'll steer around them. that doesn't happen very much because everyone knows that that area is off limits more or less. You
Right.
might have like some fishing boats down at like fishing planes, like spotting planes down at like 3,000 or 2,000 feet or something like that, close to that 10-mile limit or maybe 20-mile, but the area goes out 250 miles.
And that's a pretty good distance. And the reason why I just suggest that, and we won't spend any time on this now, but if it's any kind of battery powered or any kind of drone-ish kind of thing, it's not going out that far.
It would have to launch,
yeah.
if it was something that was spending any time out there, it would have to launch from out there, essentially.
Right, exactly.
And so let me answer the second part of the question, the diametrically opposed part. So in that sense, those areas are not restricted, right? Now, if you are international traffic or non-US traffic and you are crossing into these areas, there's another line that kind of intersects here that runs north to south, and that's our Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. If you're international traffic, you enter that ADIZ, that is essentially restricted airspace. You cannot essentially enter into the U.S. Through that. So in that sense, if you're unknown traffic more or less, then it is restricted airspace as you cross that threshold.
I have flown in a private aircraft with a friend of mine. It's a pilot, and we flew into restricted airspace. And we had to land at an airport that was on the other side of the restricted airspace. And you probably know the area, Point Mugu, right, off of the West Coast. And the amount of chatter between us and that base, right? Now we had got our clearance and everything, but they knew that we were there.
Oh yeah.
And it was fun. It was interesting, but yeah, it's restricted airspace over a Navy base.
Yeah. So it's an actual term. Restricted is like a technical term for a type of airspace under the U.S. umbrella, and you do not penetrate restricted airspace. I mean, even in a jet, we have to schedule it, call ahead, and it's usually for good reasons. It's right over a release for a bombing drop or something like that.
Sure. Okay, so now radar picks it up first, right? And what's the processes after? Is everything automated, right? If radar picks it up, does the whole plane, all of its sensors, focus, cameras, whatever, focus on that particular target?
Exactly. Yep. And so what we were seeing was that it was on a radar, and we would, just kind of lock them up in the radar. So we're kind of selecting it, right? And then as people happen to get close enough to them, the other sensors, which are slewed to that radar, are then picking up the object. And some of these sensors were kind of visual sensors or IR sensors. And so that's when we were seeing IR energy come from that location, like, the precise location, not the general location, but the precise location. And so we're seeing something there where the radar says there should be something there. Okay, now this is a physical object, most likely.
Now, what was you guys are talking to each other, right? What are you saying at this point?
Well, we're just kind of like, what the fuck are these things? Like, it's just very crude, like, in court, and the jokes eventually start coming up about, UFOs and blah, blah, blah. But at this point, it's more of just kind of confusion, really, still, at what we're seeing. We're realizing this is now like a safety threat. We have to like truly respect these things. Like, we can't just like pretend they're radar false tracks or something like that. We had to make the assumptions that they're solid. So that's kind of like the mental state we're at once we pick them up on the camera, the IR camera.
Who was closest? Actually, let's back up. How many F/A-18s are out there at this point?
So right now, I'm talking about like a general amount of people seeing this over a period of several months. All right, so like people are seeing these all the time on their radars, and they're just either they're far enough away that they, don't bother anyone, or they happen to see it on their FLIR, and that's that. But they're going about their mission, and that's the end of it. But eventually, people were trying to essentially like fly up and see them at this point as well, but no one had actually been able to see one yet, which was strange, myself included. We were trying to fly up to them, and we see it on the radar. And again, our radar is linked to our camera, which is showing us the IR energy. And all that information is linked to the real world and is shown in my helmet. And so there's like a little box in my eyesight that's tracked on my eyes and my head. It shows me where to look to see the object as I come to this merge about 500 feet away from it. And I can see it on my camera, and I can see it on the radar. I can see it in my helmet, like where I should be looking, and I'm looking there, and we don't see anything. And that was strange. And then of course it's still there on the radar, still there on the FLIR, and that was that's that. And so what do we make of that?
Yeah, right. Was there motion at that point when you're looking at this specific moment, when you're looking through the box on you're looking out in the area where it should be? Was it moving or was it stationary? What was your?
Well, it depends. Some of them were stationary, some of them were moving. Typically, when I was if I tried to intercept one, they were stationary. I never tried to intercept a moving one. And did they move a little bit like at the actual merge? It's tough. It's really tough to say. I can't look out and necessarily tell. I might be able to get some closure speed, but that could be my aircraft moving, like changing that velocity and not him. So it's really something I have to look at the tapes to really give you an answer for. I don't have that memory.
And not to revisit something that you've answered a million times, but I get the chance to ask this. Never have you ever seen one of these with your own eyes?
No.
And why do you think that? Why I find that part so fascinating, right?
Like I said, we were trying to see them. We see them on our radar, and I don't know what was special about the particular cases where the people saw them. I have some thoughts, but I don't. I have no data on that. So, like the first time we actually saw them with our eyes, someone in my squadron, the object was right at that entry point of the working area. So that's at a very specific altitude at a GPS location. And so when you enter the area at that, 10 miles offshore, you're doing it at a specific location. And all the traffic that's leaves about 1,000 feet lower. And that's just how it goes. And they flew out there, and we were respecting these objects at this time because we were seeing on the FLIR and everything else. And he flew out there, and one of these objects went down his wing, essentially. There's two aircraft flying like this. This is the lead aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
The object went right in between them. And I say it went in between them. I don't think it was probably moving. It was probably stationary at that point. But the jets, of course, were moving. And so it appeared from their perspective went between them. But
how did they describe it? What did they see? And was this? Was this a pilot that has come forward?
It's a pilot who has testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee and Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, just like I have back in the 2017 timeframe. And they also spoke to New York Times as a non-public source.
Right.
When my New York Times article came out in 2019, among others.
Okay. So we don't know who this is. That's fine.
Correct.
But how did they describe what they saw?
They described a black or dark gray cube, and it was what they described as inside a clear sphere is the word they used. I sometimes describe it as translucent because I really don't know what a clear sphere would look like if it was perfectly clear. So I have to assume it was somehow translucent since he was able to see through it, but could still tell there was a sphere there. And from what he was able to tell, it looked like the apexes or the points of the cube were kind of like on the inside of that sphere, right? So it was just kind of like fit in there. Not like it was like a little cube in a big sphere. It was just, perfectly fit in a way. And that, that was it. There was no necessarily propulsion or like propellers or.
Now, as a trained pilot, and this is no joke, I know my aircraft, right? I live next to Lockheed Skunk Works, for instance. I see the crazy stuff every single day, right? As you can imagine. I know my planes. You are paid to know your planes, right? In your aircraft. And when you hear something like this, what goes through your mind? I mean, you have to take your co-pilot or, your teammate at his word. What goes through your mind when you hear that kind of description?
Yeah. So I was, I had no reason to doubt what he said. He's as great as pilot as any other I've had the honor to serve with. And so it wasn't just what he said. It was because we could still rationalize in some sense, right? Like we could still rationalize perhaps some clever device that looks like that. And so again, we weren't jumping necessarily to some crazy conclusion at this point. But the way he said it was just like, it was just, everyone was just very pissed that this was now a massive safety issue that we had to deal with, because, and I don't remember this for a fact, but this kind of goes back to your previous point about, why are we seeing them now, and why couldn't we see them with our eyes? But I don't think their radar was working that day when they went out there, because I don't think he would have flown through the object he would have flown through the track file on the radar, because we were expecting them as objects at this point. And so he also returned immediately after that, because he didn't feel comfortable executing the rest of the flight, not knowing if there was objects around him. My supposition is that the radar wasn't working, and perhaps the object didn't know the jets were there either, in a sense. If they weren't receiving energy from the jet, then perhaps, for a reason, it surprised, the jet surprised it. Perhaps. I don't know. It's just a fun theory I have.
Okay. Now you've now said we didn't arrive at a crazy conclusion yet. Your words, right?
Yep.
You said that like 3 times.
So I just kind of walking us where we were in our mental state, right? We didn't, again, it wasn't like, okay, now UFOs. It was just very much like, all right, this is must be some crazy balloon drone thing that is some test program thing that perhaps people have for whatever crazy reason decided to temporarily test in our working areas, or got blown off course, or who knows what.
Well, even that is a crazy conclusion, isn't it? I mean,
it's getting there, right? Like we're starting to, like, we're crossing the low hanging fruit off the list here, and that's where we're getting to, right? Because that doesn't really make sense when you start to think about it, and I will explain it more. But that's just where we were, in reality.
Did you ever get to the crazy conclusion point?
Not really, because we left. We left and went on deployment, and then when we kind of really got to the point where I would say we were at that point, it was when we saw the gimbal. And that's just kind of when we stopped talking about it.
Why?
Yeah. Well, we were very loosely told to, just generally speaking. And then it was, hey, we're literally getting ready for war right now. So, it's very easy to keep us focused on what we're doing, because it's very dangerous. And even that training set that we're on is typically more dangerous than the actual combat deployments we go on, right? So we're doing all our tactics, we're flying day and night, we're stressing ourselves out to get ready for combat. So we weren't even in a mental state, really. This is the most stressful times of our careers, of our lives. And
you don't need little green men.
Yeah, that's the last thing we needed. But it wasn't about, we maybe had the right to make a conclusion like that or start thinking in that general direction, but we were just in no mental state to start, going down trains of thought like that.
Yeah. Black cubes and translucent balls of energy is that's getting to crazy town for anybody. And when you have an engineering degree and background, that's defying physics and who has this kind of technology. And now you're clouding your thought for sure.
Well, it's hard to. What's interesting is that a lot of times we look very zoomed in on this problem, and we try to look for the answers. Right? We try to get that picture all zoomed in, and we blow it up and X, Y, and Z. But I think there's a lot more valuable data in a sense if we zoom out, especially what we're seeing on the East Coast. We can zoom out and see what's happening outside of that frame, right? So I just described a single frame, essentially a cube and a sphere, and we can't draw too many conclusions, and we could also rationalize it pretty easy as a balloon or perhaps some interesting drone test. But when you zoom out of time and you zoom out a little bit of scale, and you say, okay, how often is this happening, and how many of these objects are there, and what are their flight characteristics and profiles over the course of a day or longer that they are out there, and how do we then reconcile that information with what we know of normal flight mechanics of drones, of energy storage and density and weight, and all those things that all of a sudden make you say, okay, wait, this probably isn't a drone when you actually start thinking about it. And also, why would we be testing stuff in international waters in the busiest airspace on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, certainly. And the comments that have been in the media that and have heard many times, and some of them have come from you too as well, have stunned a lot of people, including myself. Which is, how often did you see these? Every day. How many? Lots. Where? In our airspace, right? And this has taken people by surprise. And when you look back at it now, was it indeed like every day that you got in your F/A-18 from that point forward, you were going out with this new radar system, and you and your co-pilots and your pilots, everything, were seeing these things?
We had a way of somewhat categorizing these objects on the radar using what we call the target aspect indicator. And I'll answer your question, I promise. But this target aspect indicator, it's very smooth. And essentially, if this is what we see on the radar, like a ball, then there's kind of like a tail, and it points where the aircraft is going, essentially, right? So if a jet turns, you see it turn. These objects look different. Their target aspect indicator would kind of jump around as if it just either wasn't tracking the in-between or I don't know why, but it was jerky. Even though the object was moving in the general direction that was being indicated, it wasn't like going backwards. It was still moving in that direction. And so we could kind of identify these objects on our radar, at least I could. And again, we weren't doing like a big study. We weren't talking about this a lot. We weren't going around and cataloging on a day-by-day basis, but I mean, probably 99% of the flights that we go on out there, we would see these objects somewhere within our radar scope on the course of the mission, at least one or two that had the radar characteristics. That does not mean we could go and either idea on the FLIR or visually to say we were seeing them on those, but they would be out there. We cover a lot of airspace with our sensor systems, and I'm not going to use any numbers to quantify it, but it's a pretty wide berth of area that we get to look at. And so it may not be as surprising as you may think that we would see these objects regularly out there. We'd always see them over the water. They're always over the water. It'd never be over the land. Somewhat over the bay. Like there's a lot of like kind of inland water. I don't even want to call it that, but there's barrier islands, and so there's kind of an inner coast there. Mm-hmm. I would occasionally see them over there. And to this point, right? I perhaps think we might have seen some in the Middle East, but we were never able to confirm them. I did see target aspect indications that were similar over there, but it's so busy over there and the airspace is so congested and we're so busy that there was never a consideration to try to confirm that, even if we were able to.
Can we talk some basic logistics here, just for information? Mm-hmm. Airspeeds. When we go back and we listen to, as you have, David Fravor and Alex Dietrich, the performances, 80,000 feet to sea level in a second. Dave Fravor, just it was gone, and some of these descriptions of the Tic Tac just don't make any sense in the world of physics as we understand them today. Did you experience anything like that was just out of the norm?
I never saw anything that darted on the radar. I would see them typically at 0.6 to 0.8 Mach, which is somewhere around 240, maybe 330 knots, somewhere in there, depending on altitude. You would see things on the radar that would be strange, but I hesitate to necessarily attribute that to the reality of the situation, right? Because I don't necessarily know if that sensor system is calibrated properly to be able to feed me that type of information. They're not necessarily designed to show me perhaps hypersonic things that are moving at various speeds. Maybe that looks like a skip, or maybe that's just bad sensor data. So I generally hesitate to say that. However, there are a lot of interesting stories from other pilots as well that...
Oh, we lost you. Ryan, you have locked up. See, this is the man right here. Let's see if we get Ryan back. And Ryan, stay with me. I don't know if you can hear me, Ryan. Let's go. I'm going to send, if you can hear me, I'm sending you a quick text. Just when things were getting great. And let's see. I am trying to see if we still have Ryan here connected. Okay. Okay, he's gone. He's out and coming back. So what is interesting here, just a quick recap as I wait for Ryan to come back to us. Having this happen on a daily basis on the East Coast, picked up by so many different aircraft, is interesting in of itself. But they have an upgraded radar system that has been installed. It's much more sensitive. And then when the radar is picking up on something, all of the other sensors, and that's the camera systems, the FLIR, the infrared. Okay. Yeah, that was, see, that, I'm not a conspiracy guy, Ryan, but that was the man right there. That was the man.
I'm getting shut down. My computer reboot.
Oh, is that what it was? See, that's the man. That's the man right there. You know better.
Just randomly reboot. I have no idea why. And then when I boot up, it said it rebooted because of an error.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so next question in line. I was just doing a recap of how the systems work. The next, when you're talking about airspeed, okay, some of these are stationary, some are actually moving. Altitudes. What were you typically seeing there? And were there?
I'm laughing because I'm seeing some of these comments right now. Men in Black coming to get me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Help us. All right.
It's all in good fun. It's all we're just having fun.
Where else? I'm sorry. Where were we? Yeah, we were 0.6, 0.8 Mach. I would occasionally see them at like 1.1 and 1.2 Mach. Typically that'd be when they just be like buzzing east or something of that nature, like deeper out into the ocean. We'd see them kind of meandering vertically as well. And so they would never just, they would rarely just kind of like be darting in a very straight line. A lot of time they kind of appear to be meandering in a direction, both vertically and also horizontally. Right. So if you think of like a GPS, you go look in the sky and you see like that perfectly straight cloud. Right. Like you can tell something's on autopilot, you see enough of it. But when you can kind of tell when something seems almost more organic or if it's being flown manually and things of that nature. And this kind of seemed messier in a sense that it was kind of more organic in a sense. And it would kind of meander vertically, both down and up and horizontally, against the wind, with the wind. And so it seemed like the wind was just not a factor. It didn't seem like it was like had to fight the wind really. It just seems like it had to, it just seemed like it was there. Right. Like, and we've seen some reports of that as we get more and more of these range Fowler reports that are being FOIA'd out. And I remember one, they were talking about the object being in the middle of a thunderstorm essentially, and like super strong winds and just perfectly stationary. And he's got it on his camera and everything else. And he's like fighting to stay in the area. And I know what that means. I've been there too. And when he says fighting to me in the area, you have 100 knot winds. Every time you turn, it's pushing you like miles down, it's like skidding. And, just have an object that's just perfectly stationary out there. You just wouldn't expect that.
Yeah, not affected by it at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And what about, okay, so we have meandering, right? And something under drunken manual control, if you will, and not necessarily on autopilot or following a GPS track, right? That would make sense, and going from point to point. What about something more organized? Was there repeatability? Were these following a pattern at times?
I'll say there was a pattern that they seemed to be clustered in our working areas. Right. So they weren't respecting the boundaries of the working area, both the outer boundaries and also the internal boundaries that we use to subdivide. And so they'd meander across those sub boundaries, which is like a kind of internal faux pas, like, hey, you know, we might switch things, but you should be calling up. But it's still strange to see things switching between. But to like go outside the area is kind of like a violation bust, especially at certain altitudes. You would be in violation of FAA procedures to be going outside of those areas in Class A airspace, essentially. And so they would not respect those boundaries as well. And, you know, it's interesting to note that the northern boundary of that area is a major traffic lane, international traffic lane, that is specifically designed to route traffic into the U.S. and avoid the areas. And just to the north of that channel is essentially the Air Force equivalent of our working areas. And so there's this tight band, and guess what? Those objects are going over there as well. So when we talk about this being not just a military safety risk, but a commercial one, this is, you know, just one very well, you know, explained example.
Well, you have, and here's the other thing. You know, and I understand the military. I'm a military brat. Okay. Well, not really. My dad was in the Army band. So but,
hey, yeah, that's it. You're in.
Yeah, no, I did my world tour, right? I did that move every 3 years, my whole life. But and I understand the threat to our military, and I grew up on bases, and I get that. I certainly respect it. But up and down the East Coast, where you have JFK, and you have Dulles, and you have Miami, and Boston, and all these other airports with the international traffic coming out, the amount of commercial flights, it's a crazy amount of traffic going through all of the stuff that you are seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's every day, right? There's a ton of traffic over there. And yes, it's a big sky, and that's kind of a saying in the Navy, or I don't know, maybe just in aviation. It's kind of a joke. Little aircraft, big sky. It's kind of a way of saying, you know, hey, kind of like a good luck, you'll be fine with mid-airs type situation. But the reality is that these things can have serious consequences, and we've seen this. We've seen the reporting grow on this. We've seen, you know, 500 plus reports at this point. So you can see just how common it is on a numbers basis. Yeah.
Can I ask you this? Are you still in communication with Navy pilots today that are active duty?
Yeah.
And is this still going on the East Coast with the same frequency that you were experiencing?
I'm still in touch, and I don't keep necessarily a regular tab on a lot of them. Most of my contacts right now are actually deployed, believe it or not. But generally speaking, yes, it is still occurring. Yeah, I mean the reports that we just received, that were just FOIA'd are from recent times, and the UAP, or not the ODNI report that just came out. I think it was, I forget the time limit, but it was sometime in the past, maybe 24 months or 18 months or so, that the majority of the new cases have been gathered up. And that's through new reporting through the Navy and the Air Force. And I mean, we only train in so many places, right? So call it 150 of those reports split across 3 or 4 naval training facilities. How many of those are off the East Coast? You know, you could call it 40 of them or so.
Yeah, it's a numbers game.
It's a numbers game, but like, yeah. So I mean, we can quantify this now, right? It's not like a mystery. Like we have our second round of data. We're seeing the numbers grow because we're reporting more. So, you know, it's happening. It's still there, and the government is actively cataloging data on it as we speak.
Now,
one more comment too.
Sure.
I don't really talk to my Navy folks about this that much. Out of respect, because this is now an official program and this is a classified program, right? And
how do you know the question that I was about to ask?
Yeah. I don't know. So I don't, to your point, I don't really like poke them on this. If someone has an interesting story that they want to tell me that's not classified, cool. But I wouldn't try to poke around that bear.
I want your opinion here. Okay. All right. I know that you're a black and white data driven engineer. That's where your brain is. I get that. But sometimes opinions matter. Okay. The majority of the reporting, the majority of things that we are hearing about and have heard about come from the Navy. And it seems disproportionate in that direction. We have the United States Air Force, right? And it's their job to fly the skies too as well. The Marines do their thing, and the Army does their thing, and Coast Guard's got their helicopters and stuff. And I get that, but there has been a general lack of attention from the United States Air Force. Why do you think that is, and why is the Navy apparently more open to the discussion?
I'll say this is that I don't know, but I think I think it is intentional, and I don't think I think it's for, I think relatively important reasons. I don't think that they're necessarily snubbing their nose at this out of stigma or anything of that nature. I think it's probably a bit more involved, and I don't necessarily know the details, but I'll say that's my general opinion.
Yeah. And is it also, taking this one step further, is it that the Air Force has been collecting data? I don't know this as a fact, right? I'm from the outside in, but the Air Force must have some pretty sophisticated sensors and radar installed on their planes and also at air bases around the world. We should have the very, very best of the best of the best. I'm not saying it's better than the Navy, but it's got to be equivalent so they have the ability to pick up the same information or better. But yet in this OD&I report, again, I'm just taking a guess, but I would assume that most of that information is from the United States Navy and it's not coming from the Air Force.
I expect that at an operational level, like at my level where we were seeing things, that they're seeing the same things.
Right.
I just think that there is, like you said, there must be some process that's stopping that data from continuing forward. I don't know what it is. And like I said, I'm sure it's much more complicated than I would have, be privy to know. I don't think it is, like I said, just a nose snub. I think it is, I think they are really holding out for some particular reason.
Yeah, I think, since the closing of, again, this is opinion, but since the closing of Project Blue Book in 1969, when they said nothing to see here, right, 1969, that's been their attitude ever since. Right, so it has been closed off, and they're in that comfort zone, and that's where they're going to stay until.
If the Navy wants to jump on that grenade for them, perhaps they're more than willing to let them do it. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, they can't have two people leading the charge on it, so perhaps they're just sitting back and letting the Navy continue doing what they're doing.
There was this is just between you and I, right? What was it like? You come back after training. And you guys hang out, you guys talk, right? Chow, whatever, watching TV. I'm not talking about the debrief, right? I'm not talking about that and sitting down and talking with your commanding officers. I'm talking about you and your friends. Were you guys talking about this? And if you were, what was that conversation like?
We were, so like there's kind of like this social hierarchy in a sense in a squadron, and there's the JOPA, which is the junior officers, and then there's kind of your middle management 04s, and then your commanding officer 05, right? And so there's a room that's kind of like the JOPA room where it's just kind of all the lieutenants and stuff, and that's where we would be, doing our more open conversations and whatnot and shooting the shit. And that's when we would, just wonder what the fuck was going on. No one wanted to really draw conclusions, but there were plenty of jokes because that's what we do in a fighter squadron. But there was no real, like, I would say, like, deep philosophical thought on what it could be. It was more of just an uncomfortable topic that there were some cracks of jokes, and also we have to brief about it because they're out there. And we don't want to hit them. So it was very pragmatic at the end of the day. But, like most things in a fighter squadron, we treat the uncertainty with humor.
So you must have gotten some of that, right? Oh, okay, here comes Graves.
No, it wasn't me. I was not even really associated with it, right? Like it was all of us that were seeing it, and it was the whole squadron and then other squadrons that had it. So,
right.
I was not particular. In fact, I was probably less involved because I didn't even really see it with my eyes. Other people were seeing them first, and we're having bigger issues with it. So
Now, before we're going to take a break in about 5 minutes. When we come back, we'll talk about the ODNI report. I would certainly say that, and I watched with great curiosity the 60 Minutes episode, and there has been a general openness with the media. Were you surprised that you were going to go from the Navy into this world of not only the word UFO, right, or UAP, but also what comes along with that, with the Department of Defense or the NSA or the CIA or this community or the UFO community? It's a whole different ball game, isn't it?
Yeah, I had zero expectations that my life was going to take this turn. Uh, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I'm happy. I did. I mean, I stand by what I did, and I would have done it. I would do it again. I think that we don't necessarily know where this conversation's going to end. I don't know where it's necessarily going to end. But even with, call it an oversized risk of failure or just embarrassment or career suicide or whatever you want to call it, I think it's too important of a conversation. There's too much opportunity risk to ignore something like this. And whether it's because we're going to find out we're not alone or whether we find out we're being spied on by a foreign nation, it's interesting either way.
Now, a little esoteric. This is going a little bit outside, but I am interested in this. Did you ever have a point of what you thought may have been a contact through consciousness? Like maybe that you were out there just making, hanging out with friends and you knew that they were there. There wasn't anything adversarial. It's like walking through the woods and you've got squirrels off in the distance. Did you ever have like that, a conscious connection?
No. No, I can't say I did. And flying is such a incredible act, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, but while we're out there, it's just such intense focus. And we use a word that we call a scan, and the scan is literally us moving our focus from the different areas and our different tools inside of our jet by the millisecond in some cases to gather data and airspeeds and radar system, all that stuff. And it's in a sense a very meditative process, and we're so very focused that I would almost think it would be easy to identify like an intrusive thought like that in some sense,
right?
But I can't claim I did.
No entanglement of neurons. Hey,
I'm aware of.
How you doing today?
Well, I mean, we do also have like 7 radios in the jet, right? And not to mention, I mean, we got ICS. I can hear my guy in the back seat farting sometimes. So, I mean, it's, who knows? I might be getting some mixed signals.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the movement that we have, we're going to come back and talk about the ODNI, but with the openness that seems to be going on, you have met with our elected officials on Capitol Hill. Are they asking questions from the mindset of they don't know anything about this, right? They don't, and this has been going on for a while. Do they seem surprised, right? And that they need these answers, or are they coming at it from another area?
They've seen the data, right? It's not that far away. I mean, it's there, right? It's on the SIPRNet. We've gathered the data, even if it just want to say throw away the past, number of decades and just look at what we've gathered over the past, 3 to 4 years with the new reporting things. There's enough just right there to make them sure of their convictions, and we're seeing that, right? They're not ashamed to delve into this topic and answer questions about it. They sound as curious as I am, right? Because they've had the opportunity to receive this information.
Have they? And this isn't classified. You can answer this. I feel pretty comfortable. Do they use words like UFOs? Do they use words like extraterrestrial when trying to find answers? Is their mind questioning that, right? Are they trying to get answers from out there too as well? Or is it a purely an adversarial possible Chinese-Russian threat?
No, they're very specific in the language that has been used to create the Aero Office. And even with the passing of the 2023 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, they very explicitly have done their due diligence and homework in writing that legislation to ensure that the target of investigation is the unknown. It is the unknown. And the adversarial aspect and those things, if and or when, because I expect they probably will be part of this in some nature, they will get, of course, filtered out to the appropriate channels. We just saw recently in a PowerPoint presentation from Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of DOD's Aero Office, that he gave to the National Transportation Board. And inside that presentation, they make it pretty clear, they make it very clear that, you know, this is identified as an ongoing aviation safety risk that they now need to integrate into our essentially our policy and our procedural frameworks for aviation safety, both on the military and the commercial side. And so yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does. They have to be, and I'm talking about elected officials, just as curious as anybody else. I mean, they've grown up.
Oh yeah, about the specific. Yeah, let me address the point on the particular terms. And so he's approaching that as he's been targeted by Congress to the legislation specifically to look into what we call this anomalous side of things, right? And so to get back to that, we've seen the name actually update from aerial to aerospace to, you know, to now anomalous objects, right? We're trying to get rid of the domain nonsense so that we can't have perhaps the Air Force say, well, you know, it's actually a transmedium object, not an air object. And so that's no longer, you know, we're no longer to comply with your data request, right? They're trying to get past all that because they are ready to focus on the anomalous. And, you know, whether words like you described are being used, extraterrestrial, alien, I mean, we hear those words, but I think it's in everyone's best interest to be agnostic in what that anomalous thing could be. And it most likely won't be one thing. I recommend that just due to fear of anthropomorphization of the topic and thinking that, you know, drawing false conclusions or going down false trains of thought before we have the proper data to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what would scare the crap out of me is if it was Chinese. That's a scary thought, right? Yeah. I mean, I'd rather have it be alien. I mean, that's a safer zone to be playing in than to have some kind of crazy technology like this in the hands of somebody that doesn't have our best interest in play.
Absolutely. Or it's say it's, I mean, I bet it's all of the above, right? If we are regularly observing things out there, that would be the perfect cover for a foreign nation and then come in and try to mimic that, right? And to use that cover in order to sit there and inspire in our technology and our tactics.
Let's take our break. Stay right there, Ryan. We'll take a quick break. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Ryan Graves. He's finally with us for the first time, and I'll be right back. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back. Check out Billy Carson's Forbidden Knowledge. ForbiddenKnowledge.com or ForbiddenKnowledge.tv, where you can get access to over 6,000 videos, movies, TV series, exclusive documentaries like the Black Knight Satellite. You can do it all for just $7.77 per month or $77 per year after the 3-day trial, which is also totally free to check out. It's all simple to do. Billy Carson is the best. It's simple. ForbiddenKnowledge.com or ForbiddenKnowledge.tv. That's the number 4BK. I will be hosting and emceeing the Conscious Life Expo this February 10th through the 13th at the LAX Hilton right here in Los Angeles, California. 200 speakers, including Linda Moulton Howe, Bashar, Deborah King, George Norrie, Daniel Sheehan, Scott Walter Johnstone, and David Wolf. Over 200 vendors, special events. This is the biggest event of its kind on planet Earth. You've got to come and hang out with all of us. Tickets and info at ConsciousLifeExpo.com. The links are below. On Saturday, April 1st, that's right, April Fool's Day 2023, I will be hosting the Parapod Festival at the Hyatt Regency right here in Valencia, California. It's a live one-day podcast awards. It's a film festival. It's a full-on media event. We're going to have sky watching. There's going to be a Lifetime Achievement Award presented to Linda Moulton Howe. Right now, you can submit your podcast, your film, your TV series, any of your paranormal media for consideration. You can do all of that on the links below. For info and tickets, go to parapodfilmfest.com. That's parapodfilmfest.com. April 7th through the 14th, 2023, I'll be hosting and presenting on the Hidden Secrets Seminar at Sea Cruise. From Los Angeles to the Mexican Riviera on the Navigator of the Seas. That's right, up top, a giant water slide. You've got to check out the Navigator of the Seas. It's amazing. We've got Scott Walter, Adam Apollo, Nick Pope, Brad Olson, Vivian Chauvet, Jason Shirka, Robert Grant, Ruben Langdon, and another 12 amazing speakers and presenters. It's all simple to do. Just visit divinetravels.com/Hidden Secrets 2023. You know you want to go on a cruise with me. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. It's an amazing conversation we've got going on tonight with Ryan Graves, and I'm waiting for Ryan to come back and join us here. He's probably getting coffee, and he's on the East Coast. And what we're going to be talking about next is two things. We're going to be talking about the NDAA for 2023. Ryan, welcome back. Welcome back. And of course, the ODNI report. Now, Ryan, there is 2 points that I want to make here. I'll do it very briefly. That historically speaking, with the last report that came out in August of last year, we got, no, wait a minute. Is it 2 years ago now? Or 2020? Yeah, we're in 2023, right? Okay, so we kind of skipped a little bit there. But anyway, the first report, again, focused sort of, and we're taking guesses here, but like from the Nimitz forward, you know, a modern historical context. And in this report, focused on what has been reported since the last report. Okay, we're going to come back to that. But now I want to talk about the NDAA, because there's a point in the NDAA that's written into law that nobody else is talking about. I am. And that is written into law. There is a mandate that the DOD and the ODNI investigate all military reports going back to January 1st, 1945. That report by law is due in June of 2024. Now, all of the criticism that has been there about these last two reports being a modern historical military perspective, right? And not looking at other historical events in the past. Now that is law. How important is it that the ODNI go back and the Department of Defense and revisit their own reporting on UFOs? Well, back then it was UFOs from January 1st, 1945.
I mean, it's incredibly important, right? And I think it's, I think people have been asking for this long before I've been involved in this topic. I think it's a really powerful statement by Congress and by the people that helped write this legislation to show that they are serious about working through this, and not just looking at it from now, but going through and uncovering the skeletons to figure out what's going on.
If we go back historically, well, it's 40 years now. It doesn't. It seems like yesterday, but the Air Force has their own case, heavily documented, and I'm talking about Rendlesham in the United Kingdom, and 1980, right? New Year's 1980, and those witnesses and that paperwork is here. Even though it's 40 years old now, time flies, but it's a modern case that the ODNI and the Department of Defense can go back and look at, and those witnesses can be brought forward. Should they hear from one of their own cases, an Air Force case, albeit from the United Kingdom, but should those witnesses come forward and speak about this?
I would encourage them to, and I think this legislation enables them to do so. It does provide a lot of protections for people that do have knowledge of illegal programs or programs that have not conformed to proper reporting mechanisms, things of that nature. And so I think that we're going to find out the answer to that question. Maybe not whether they should, but whether they will sometime in the near future. At least that's what this legislation will enable. And from what I've heard through the chatter, that's already begun. That process has already begun, and there have been individuals that have come forward to communicate through those proper channels to tell what they have to tell.
Were you surprised at the language from Representative Burchett? He's upset, right? We've been lied to. I don't trust the government, and we've got to get that. We've got to find out what the Department of Defense knows. We need to get to the bottom of this. Are you surprised to have an elected official just step forward and put everything on the table like he has?
If you asked me that a few years ago, I would say yes. But frankly, we've seen a lot of elected officials do that. He's been more, a bit vocal on it in one way, but there's been other ways that politicians have kind of, communicated on this topic, and that's some very senior members within the Senate Armed Services Committee and Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, putting these things in motion. And ensuring that the DoD and the other entities that may be involved are under, are being pursued so that we can put this to rest one way or another.
Are they? I'm talking about Capitol Hill. Are they in communication with you? Do you have open lines of communication? Are they reaching out?
I wouldn't describe it in that necessarily manner. I mean, I've reached out to them, and I've especially, I would say over the past year, I've reached out a lot, maybe a year and a half. And that, that goes, for a lot of people related to this topic. I've been communicating to NASA on this topic, been communicating on the Hill, and they're listening, but they're not necessarily seeking me out for my advice at this point.
I know that, because of your engineering background and your interest in science and engineering, when you have somebody like Avi Loeb, from Harvard, also, break ranks, wrote an incredible book, Extraterrestrial, and he's been a guest on the show many times, and I've had dinner with him, right? I've sat and just listened. And when you're around somebody that intelligent, that can speak in another language that you and I know very little about, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And but he is absolutely convinced that the possibility is real and that we need to apply the science here. We need to get focused. And that seems to be where we are today. When you look at the ODNI report and the conversation from the military, is we don't know what's going on, but we've got to look at the data. We've got to start applying the science. Do we need that cooperation from universities and from scientists and from the Department of Defense and all get on the same page to try to figure out what's going on?
I think generally, yes. I think we're seeing that form up in a lot of ways, and I've seen the term whole of government approach. I've seen emerging national effort. I've seen those terms be thrown around because that's essentially what we are seeing, and we're seeing that essentially being headquartered within the DoD now, but the Aero Office has fingers out and is able to coordinate with other government agencies and things of that nature to bring in the proper resources that they need in order to continue this conversation. But I don't think that necessarily means that we have to necessarily depend on the government to lead that conversation. We're at a point where the democratization of technology is such that I think it is possible for us to achieve our own data sets. It is possible for organizations outside of the government to move the conversation forward. And I think, of course, the government can probably throw jet fuel on that due to the data sets and the sensor systems that they have available. But of course, that's not always going to be what they can do due to national security reasons and things of that nature. And sometimes it's just simply not the thing that's being observed or the conclusion that you would draw from seeing it, but rather the fact that you can even see it, or the fact that you're seeing it at a certain location, right? Just makes it so that you just can't declassify the information, even if you want to, just because it does have real world political, international, geopolitical consequences.
Now,
Yeah.
and
But let me add this. Like, so how do we do that, right? Like we understand what sensors could be available to understand these, right? We understand we can see them with an APG-79 radar, right? That tells us something, and we can continue to build on that. I lead an organization at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics called the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Integration Outreach Committee, and it's a permanent committee within the AIAA. Or I call it the AIAA. It's a permanent committee within that professional organization that's made up of aerospace engineers and aeronautical engineers and physicists and everything across the spectrum that essentially creates and builds objects in the air and space, which includes a large portion of our defense base. And within that organization, that's one of the efforts that we're undertaking, is we're putting together documentation that describes the detection, the characterization, and the evaluation of these objects using different sensing phenomenologies and frequencies and methodologies and at different locations and things of that nature. And that'll be a document that we'll be putting out to the entire aerospace industry that'll be reviewed and updated yearly so that we can then build technology and expand our data sets, right? We can do the science and we can gather more data and advance the topic.
Would it surprise you or the other members of the AIAA, AIAA, that some of these conclusions will come to it's coming from out there? It's not from Earth. This is extraterrestrial. We are being visited. Would you be surprised?
I think it's almost hard not to be surprised, even if you were 100% expecting it in some sense. But yeah, I mean, I would say I'm not surprised. I mean, we're very open to that possibility, but we're approaching it very neutrally and scientifically focused, and so we're not, we're not necessarily, driving towards any one conclusion in any sense. We're just trying to follow the data.
And I'm so with you on that. I had the show isn't about me; it's about you. But I was sitting with Steve Murillo, the pilot that I was telling you about earlier. We're sitting next to each other, and I see it's 14 miles away behind this mountain. This object comes out, and it's ginormous. I've got binoculars, and I'm looking at birds. I didn't, when you least expect it, right? Okay, and this thing was spinning. It was like a beer can. It's probably 400 feet tall. It's 14 miles away. It comes out behind this mountain. It's like this, spinning across the sky. We all see it. And lasted for about 10 seconds. Middle of the day, right? This wasn't sensor data. It's my eyeballs, right? And I see it. I'm just completely confused. And the excitement and everybody's screaming and trying to get video and camera. The point is, 10 seconds later, as I, and I go back to the binocular, Steve sitting next to me says, and it's on video, it phased out. It's gone.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, right, wait. It was huge, right? In the middle of the blue sky, right? Gone. I didn't see it disappear. I almost wish I would have seen it disappear instead of appear. That would have been more fascinating to me. But I haven't come to any conclusions on that. You know, what do I draw from that? What do I draw? Us or them? Well, doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before, but I can't come to a conclusion. And I saw this in the middle of the day. It was like the Holy Grail sighting, but I still don't know what I saw.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what makes it so difficult. I mean, it just this weird black hole of context in a sense, that makes it so difficult. Your brain almost, I imagine searches to try to recognize something that you're familiar with and to contextualize it in your environment. And when you can't find that, it'd be very unsettling.
The OD&I report combined with the NDAA has a lot of very specific language in there, and we have transmedium, very crazy word to suddenly be thrown out there. UAP in general is just an unusual thing to be in placed into budgets, right?
Yeah.
But the other part is the protection, the so-called whistleblower protection, but also the mention of health effects. And when we have that in the NDAA, it seems to me, and this is the question, do they have evidence of service men and women being affected health-wise by UAPs? Therefore, the language needs to be in there because of what has been going on in the past. Why do you think that was so specific in the NDAA?
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable conclusion that you're drawing, Jimmy. And I would encourage people to listen to Gary Nolan's statements on that. And I imagine that the work that he was involved in that area probably had a hand in that legislation to some degree.
Yeah, he was on the show a couple of weeks ago. Very fascinating insight on all of this. And the other part is the transmedium aspect, which would again suggest to me that they have seen, when I say they, right, they have the data collection there of stuff coming in and out of the water. And that I know that you didn't necessarily see this, but it's written into the legislation, which says that this has been going on with military reporting in the past.
Yeah, from the F-18, we're not well equipped to make that assessment if something is traversing into the water. As an object on our radar gets close to the surface of the water, that becomes more difficult for our radar to maintain. And so you could see it just fall out, and just disappear. Does that mean it went into the water? We just don't have the systems to really provide that layer of context around that. Now, the only way we'd really be able to tell is if we were in like a Dave Fravor situation where he was so close, he could visually see it and it was maneuvering real time and he saw that happen. But again, we operate under such vast airspaces and distances from, 30,000 feet down that it would be a pretty rare scenario to see something like that. But then again, you have the video like the gimbal and the go fast, and you could imagine a scenario where a jet might catch something if the conditions are right. But then you have like ships, right? And then But here's where probably the real answer lies, which is there's other, and I can't get down this too much, but a lot of in the air, our sensors get linked through a data link, right? And so what you'd want to do is have sensors that look below the water and elsewhere, and if all that information's in the same data link, then you'd have one combined picture of where those things were.
A submarine would help.
Well, you need sensors, complete sensor grid, essentially, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I'm not saying we don't have. I'm just saying it's not details necessarily go into.
The comments from the New York Times going back to 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 there was another excellent report from article from Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kane, who's going to be joining us next week. And in that article, buried down at the bottom, and I know that you've seen it and you probably know where I'm going, but down at the bottom, there's a comment there, a quote attributed to Dr. Eric Davis, where he says he briefed the Senate in a classified setting that we are in possession of a craft, right? Not made of this earth. Mm-hmm. Full stop, right? That's the quote. And what do we do with that? The New York Times is vetting their sources, right? They're not going to put something like that in print unless they're pretty confident that this was real and was actually said. Do you think that we are actually in possession of a craft not of this earth, and we're backwards engineering it? If we take Eric Davis at his word.
If we take Eric Davis at his word, then we would have to make that assumption. I think, even outside of that, if we look where we are with the amount of effort and legislation that's been put into and the specific language in that legislation, I think it becomes clear that, that type of briefing seems like it could be the impetus for something like this, this type of legislation. So, yeah, that seems like a very logical, clean conclusion about what happened and where we are today.
They and staying on this for a second, and I know that you have looked into all of this. I just want your input. When we look at stuff like that, where Eric is referring to a special access program that is outside of, once it's gone, that money and everything else, that's it. That's private corporation, no FOIA, right? No Freedom of Information Act, no document numbers, nothing like that. And this is also out of sight of Congress and those that are writing the checks. Is that, if that is indeed going on, taking Eric Davis at his word, then those on Capitol Hill are asking questions about things that they have absolutely no idea about, programs that are going on. Does that seem to be the case?
Well, that would be the error that the whistleblowers that would be the law that the whistleblowers would be blowing against, essentially, is that these programs that would be held under defense contractors are not legal because they are not adhering to the proper reporting channels through Congress and Senate. And so that is the whistle that is being blown, essentially. And so one potential thought is that, you enter these programs, and even though, yes, they are illegal, these people are signing NDAs and things of that nature. And so they don't feel that they can speak about it still. They still fear for their career and things of that nature, or losing, whatever clearance they have or their profession. And so these type of whistleblower laws enable people, not only in the military DoD, but specifically within the defense world, the civilian world, commercial world, to break those NDAs. It specifically calls out the ability to violate those NDAs in order to report illegal programs. And there's a secure process that's being created that goes all the way through the Congress and the Senate that elucidates what those people are reporting. There's a secure channel there to get that information forward. So these things are still, it's not a declassification process here. It's still a secure process. These are still secrets, but it is a process of bringing forward those potentially illegal programs. And if those whistleblowers are, if there's any type of retribution, what those laws do is they remove the litigation caps for the whistleblower from $300,000 to an unlimited amount of money that they could sue their employer for if they were to be fired or something for whistleblowing. And there's many other little nuances in that as well.
Would it some things have to be secret? Mm-hmm. Have to be, right? I get that. I totally understand. But if there is an alien craft, right, that is sitting in a hangar, down the street from my house, is that something that the public should know about, or should that just be kept secret?
Well, I think that's too big of a question for me, because that I think depends on very many factors, geopolitically as well as morally. I think generally I err to the side of truth and transparency on this topic, but At the end of the day, we have to consider the fact that there's people in this world that would very much use that type of stuff for negative gain or to hurt, the Western world. And as much as I support the open and truth of this topic, only so much that we don't hurt America in the process.
See, you and I, this is where you and I agree, right? And I don't want to, look, I want to get to the answers, right? I truly do. But at the end of the day, sometimes I need to sit back and go, maybe, just maybe we don't need to know, right? Maybe we don't need them to know that we know. And I'm talking about, Russia and China. It's a weird position to be in. Do we want these answers? Yeah, I think that we do. Do we really want the answers? I don't know. Sometimes we might want to just think about this a little bit more thoroughly before we open up that door. The other part that I wanted to get to before I let you go is there are 171 cases that have been reported in the new ODNI report that was just released, with some very strange quotes from ODNI, strange performance characteristics. And when you see that, what is a pilot reporting that you would get that type of classification on a UAP?
So one example would be saying stationary and high winds very precisely.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That could be one example. Another example could be staying airborne for very lengthy periods of time, longer than we would expect for something of its mass or something of that nature, or normal energy density. That could be an example. Of course, there's the rapid or, very quick accelerations to high speeds and ultimately high velocities as well as accelerations. I imagine that would fit those characteristics as well. You could perhaps think of transmedium behaviors and flight characteristics as, advances that we don't necessarily have. Could those all be tied together? Potentially, right? If it's able to seamlessly move things around the surface or the skin of the aircraft, going through the air without friction and accelerating quickly could be somewhat trivial, much like moving between, more dense water and air. Be part of the same mechanism, perhaps. But these all could perhaps be some of those characteristics.
Why do you think, Ryan, that this conversation is happening now at this point in history? I don't know. We are literally, you and I, right? You are a veteran Navy pilot on my show right now talking about legislation in Capitol Hill, right? About UFOs and UAPs and your sightings and other, whistleblower and things coming forward. And what does the Department of Defense know? And what is going, is it ET? This is a crazy point in history, isn't it? Right? Why now?
I think maybe it might just be the fact that we can't write it off anymore, and we can't just dismiss the person anymore, because the tools we have are so good and so powerful that we're able to validate that, and we just can't ignore reality. Frankly, I mean, I think it might just be that simple in a lot of ways.
Ignore what reality? Are we talking ET? Are we going back to crazy conclusion here, Ryan?
Well, the reality is that there are things that are anomalous that we don't know what they are. I mean, that is a fact. And it's not a matter of just, I think better data is going to get us to see the trash bag more clearly that's floating in the sky. We are dealing with things that we do have high fidelity resolution, and we have high uncertainty of what it is as well. Right. And so that's the state we're in, and we need to resolve that.
What's your definition of disclosure?
I think that's probably different for each person, but
it is. That's why I'm asking you. Yeah. My version is not Ryan Graves. What's your definition of disclosure?
I don't know if I can define it, but maybe I can describe it. One perhaps way it could look like is an admission of uncertainty, right? I don't think necessarily the United States perhaps can be the one to officially disclose in some sense, right? Because will the rest of the world take that at its complete face value, and we'll move into this miraculous age where we all have the same shared understanding of truth for once in humanity? Probably not. I'll probably put money against it, right? So, like, is that what it looks like, or is it really, someone in the international community stepping up on the stage and saying, hey, we as a world need to figure this out? I think a disclosure looks like a global movement to understand this versus any one nation.
When I think in a general sense, when we talk about disclosure in a UFO ET context, right? For most, disclosure to them is just one thing, and everything else falls short. And that is the president coming up going, I got to tell you, we're not alone, right? And we've made contact, and that's disclosure. Everything else falls short. Do you think that we're on that
What if
path?
it was the exact opposite?
You know what?
Where it's like, hey,
we're alone.
We all know, no, not quite, but hey, we know there's something here, but we just don't have the answers for you, and we know that sucks, but that's where we're at.
You mean, and we know that there's something coming from up there. We just don't know what. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have the details, and maybe the disclosure is less that it's there, and that the more of the disclosure, the government doesn't have all the answers for us about it.
Right. That's a real possibility. We could get that from the James Webb this year, right? Some crazy confirmation of a biosphere or a technosignature from some exoplanet. But do you think that we're moving towards that, though? Is this disclosure thing, the big D, is this something that's, kind of tangible at the moment, and we're moving towards that?
By the definition I just talked about, I think we are. By the more common definition of an event in some way, I almost agree perhaps with Lou Elizondo that it has occurred. I mean, we've had some of our biggest leaders in government, past and present, make very public statements about this that are unequivocal, that say, hey, we don't know what this is, and it's happening. What more do you want? Do you want the president to come out from the Oval Office? Is that the right move? I don't know. I don't know if that is, but we've had as much, official confirmation, at least 99% of it, as we could perhaps ever ask for. And in the next several years, perhaps we will move into, a more expected experience of disclosure for some people. And I don't know this, right? I'm just saying that we do seem to be moving towards a more organized communication around this topic. And, I'm just curious as anyone else to see exactly what that's going to look like.
Well, when 60 Minutes did their thing, and that was anticipated, right? That was a hugely viewed program. And we know about 60 Minutes' reputation. Well, later on that night, and I was curious, I just kind of observed, the world didn't burn down, right? We didn't lose their minds. We didn't lose our minds. And I found comfort in that. Do you think that the world could handle the truth if this is where we're going?
I do. I really do. I think that we're on average much more adaptable to change. We have much wider kind of scope of experiences as humans now, with our ability to kind of interface with the wider world via the internet and digital media and things of that nature, right? Our minds are more flexible and plastic in a sense for adapting to new and different ideas and strange ideas and things that maybe make us uncomfortable for fun. And so I think that in a sense, we are much more open and ready to experience that type of change as a world.
Ryan, I want to thank you on behalf of the community, our country, the world, for you coming forward and rolling the dice on this. I know it's been a difficult challenge, and the world can be tough sometimes, especially right now. And I want to thank you for all of that, seriously, and thank you for the conversation tonight. The website, uncertainvector.com, is on our website and throughout social media. If somebody wants to reach out, contact you, or help in any way, can they do that there?
I'll actually recommend the best place to probably kind of take a look would be at my new podcast, Merge Point, on YouTube. You can find it at mergepodcast.com. You'll find all the episodes on there. And I'm going to be really using that as a home base to have this conversation going forward, where I'll be interviewing pilots and scientists like Gary Nolan and others, to not necessarily bring objective data into the conversation about their experiences, but just show people just how common it is and why this really is an aviation safety threat out there.
Yeah. Now, okay, I'm not ready to let you go. One last question, and then we're done. And thank you. But can we talk about Paco and his website for a second, briefly? Paco, his community, right, of Navy pilots and hanging out, and they've got their forum and things. That before all of this madness happened, he had Dave Fravor, on the website, and they were talking about the Tic Tac back then. Did you see the original Paco article from 2016?
I think I did a while ago. I think we've said hello to each other, just met once or twice, Paco and I, and I think I did look that up, but I'll be honest, I don't remember the details at the moment.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because that's not a website that anybody from the public would know anything about, right? That's the pilots hanging out, doing their Maverick and Iceman thing, right? and trading stories. That's it. It was a great website. It is a great website, but that was a shocker of an article. And I often wonder, well, since you didn't read it when it was first there, I did, and I reached out to Paco. I did, man. I wrote him. I said, dude, man, you want to come on my show? But I'm just wondering if he had any idea, and certainly with Dave, what was about to happen because of what was revealed there. Because the world is a different place today because of that one website.
I can't imagine they did. I don't think anyone would have. I'll just answer it that simply.
What a crazy world we're in. Again, Ryan, thank you so much. I look forward to our next conversation, and be safe out there, my friend. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
You're the best. Thank you. Ryan Graves, and uncertainvector.com is his website. And I will get his podcast up in social media for everybody to go and check out. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. I'm going to get out of here. And tomorrow night, what do we have going on tomorrow night? Tomorrow night is Wednesday. Oh, man, I've got Stephen Bassett. Stephen Bassett is on with us tomorrow night, everybody. And we've got a lot to talk about. Stephen is on his game when it comes to Washington, D.C., the ODNI, and the NDAA for 2023. So all of that is tomorrow night right here on Fade to Black. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tomorrow night, Stephen Bassett, Paradigm Research Group. Until then, I want everybody to be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.